Just who is Graham Platner? Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going over a new report out of the state of Maine where Democrat Graham Platner, an oysterman and harbor master from rural Maine, has officially entered the 2026 U.S. Senate race to take on Republican incumbent Susan Collins. Now this is emerging in Maine as things are still very much up in the air for who the Democrats are going to nominate, including Democrats nationally trying to recruit the governor of the state, Janet Mills, into this race. But in this article from ABC News, it goes over Graham Platner, his background, and some of his key policy positions. I'll just run through this very quickly here. Graham Platner is a military veteran and oysterman from a small town near Maine's Acadia National Park. He is running for the U.S. Senate race as a Democrat, and he announced last Tuesday in an effort to oust Republican Susan Collins, who the five-term senator is expected to run for re-election next year. A campaign launch video shows Platner, bearded and broad-shouldered with a gruff voice, harvesting oysters and chopping wood, as he describes how Maine has become, quote, essentially unlivable for working-class people. In an interview last Monday with ABC News, Platner said he was driven to run by the growing wealth gap in the U.S., which he said has crippled working-class people in his home state. He said, "We are moving in a position where regular working-class people can't even afford to live in the towns that they were born in," said Platner, who, after four tours in Iraq and Afghanistan with the Army and Marine Corps, moved to the coastal community of Sullivan, where he grew up. This is what he looks like right here as well. This is what he looks like. Platner might draw comparisons to Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman or Dan Osborne, the union leader running as an independent for the Senate in Nebraska, after a failed attempt last year. Both men campaigned for the Senate as champions and representatives of the white working class, a demographic with whom Democrats have lost ground in recent electoral cycles. Platner, who has hired Fight Agency, a Democrat consulting firm whose members have worked for Fetterman and Osborne's campaigns, as well as that of Democrat Zohran Mamdani, the Democrat candidate for New York City mayor, saying, "I drink coffee every morning with the guys that I work next to and who are friends of mine, who all voted for Donald Trump. And they voted for Donald Trump because they wanted something new, they wanted change," Platner told ABC News, arguing that his understanding of these voters could help steer the Democratic Party, which he described as quite confused, back to a winning track. The Democratic Party needs to return to an age where it is the party of labor unions, it is the party of community organizers, it is the party of fighting for big structural change to benefit working class people. Asked who he believes the face of the Democratic Party, Platner said there isn't one, but he indicated an affinity for some of the most progressive members of the Senate, including former Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. He respects Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, and Sheldon Whitehouse, Democratic Senator of Rhode Island. Platner also described Medicare for All as an urgent priority and called the war in Gaza a genocide, saying he follows the lead of Israeli scholars on genocide. And the article goes into more specifics on Platner's specific policies, but I'm just going to leave it at that for the purpose of today's video. So this is very interesting because if you've been watching my channel for a while, or if you're new to my channel, I've been covering the Maine Senate race as one of the top competitive Senate races in 2026. And it's been clear for a while now that the Democrats don't have one single candidate at this current point in time in the race that they can really rally behind. And I would say that Graham Platner, at least based on the discourse I've seen on social media, specifically on X, it seems Platner has started off with the most momentum of all the Democrats in the race. That Platner has been able to catch a lot of attention on social media and by a lot of national media figures, more so than any of the other Democrats have so far. Now, there's a big question on this race, which is hovering, which is, what does the Democratic governor of Maine, Janet Mills, decide to do? Because this is when you kind of get into the nitty-gritty of elections and politics and such. What makes a very good candidate? Well, obviously a very important aspect of campaigns is charisma and the candidate personality and the candidate themselves. But another key important aspect that is often considered in races like this is what has the person done in the past. And therefore, when you're talking about a race for U.S. Senate, having the person that is currently the governor of the state is usually a very big plus, especially for a general election. Janet Mills, the two-time Democratic governor of the state of Maine, if she were to be the Democratic nominee, would probably have a stronger chance in the general election, as she has more of a proven track record at winning a general election. Whereas someone like Graham Platner, who is a first-time political candidate, does not have that same track record that someone like Janet Mills does. But At the same time, sometimes having no election history to run off of and being a first-time candidate can actually be a very good thing for a person's prospects. We just saw this sort of in New York City with Zohran Mamdani. He was a, I believe, city councilman, but he did not have a long track record of electoral politics in New York City, and he was able to defeat former Governor Andrew Cuomo. President Trump, you can make a very similar argument of. Never held elected office before that, and he was able to win 2016, the Republican primary, against a lot of senators, governors, past governors. So not having election experience is not a deal breaker in a lot of these primaries, but it usually means it's going to be a much harder, tougher fight. But the prospects of Platner being the Democratic candidate are very fascinating. And there is also a new development here, which is that Graham Platner has received the endorsement of U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, the Democratic aligning, quote-unquote, independent senator from Vermont. So unless Mills or someone else like Attorney General Aaron Frey enters this race, Graham Platner right now has a lot of the media attention and the momentum in this race to potentially be the Democratic nominee. Now, all this ends up talking for the general election versus Susan Collins, the Republican incumbent, where right now, 3 out of the 4 political prediction websites, Inside Elections, Political Report, and Savile Crystal Ball, all have a very slight advantage for Susan Collins in this race. And when you look at the recent election history in the state of Maine in 2020, Susan Collins was able to win her Senate race against the Democrat Sarah Gideon 51% to 42.4%. So about a likely 9-point race or so in the state of Maine. Now, this is pretty atypical for the state of Maine, when at the same level on the presidential side of things, we can actually look at how that ended up going, which is that in Maine, Kamala Harris won the state by about 7 points at the presidential level just back in November. And the track record of Maine is that Maine is more of a Democratic or likely Democratic state at the presidential level, including its other U.S. Senate race, which is currently held by independent Angus King, who also caucuses with the Democrats. He just won his Senate race by about 17 points. So Maine voted for the Democrat for president, and the independent senator who caucuses with the Democrats voted for him by pretty large margins. So Susan Collins is running as a Republican in a state that's more Democratic friendly. In the last time, she was able to win by 51% to 42.4%. Now, at the same time, it's important to note this was the smallest margin of victory in the Senate race in Maine since 2002. In 2008, Collins won by 23 points. 2014, it went Republican by 37 points. Whereas this time in 2020, it voted only by about 9 points for Collins. Now, a lot's going to be talked about for 2026 because Susan Collins' approval ratings are not relatively strong in the state of Maine. These are problems she's had in the past and in 2020, which led to a very competitive election, but she was able to pull out a very hard-fought victory. How this all goes for 2026, we're going to have to wait and see. But 2026 is supposed to be a midterm year that's more favorable for the Democrats than the Republicans. And looking at the map from 2020, we saw something that Susan Collins did that President Trump was not able to do in 2024. You look at right here, Cumberland County. This is where the city of Portland is. Portland is not the capital of Maine, that is Augusta, but Portland is the largest city overall in the state of Maine. And you saw Sarah Gideon, the Democrat, winning this county. But you look at all the other counties in the state, they all went red except for Knox County, which very narrowly voted for Sarah Gideon. And this usually does not happen. For instance, York County. This one borders with the state of New Hampshire, and it voted for Susan Collins by about 5 points. Just looking at the presidential race, looking at how President Trump did in this county, and you'll see that York County voted for Kamala Harris by about 10 points over Donald Trump. And that's with pretty much everything in Maine trending towards the Republican direction. We can actually look at the state results more in depth here. To 2024, you see here, York County shifted 2.1% towards President Trump. Portland and Cumberland County, not much of a shift, but 0.3% shift towards Trump. Lincoln County did move 1 point towards Harris, but most of the counties in Maine either barely shifted or shifted significantly towards President Trump and the Republicans. So Maine's going to be very interesting to watch for in 2026 because Maine did shift a little bit to the right in 2024, but now in 2026, it's going to be an election environment that is a lot different than 2024. And it depends on how well the Democrats are doing, because Susan Collins is the only Republican running as a U.S. Senator in a state that Kamala Harris won in 2024. But if Susan Collins was able to do this back in 2020 when Donald Trump also lost the state of Maine at the presidential level, at the same time Susan Collins was winning, the state of Maine voted for Joe Biden by about 9 points. Can Susan Collins break the trend of Maine at the national level of being a Democratic state and win again in 2026? That's going to be the question. And this is going to be a very fascinating race to watch, because whether it's Graham Platner being the Democratic candidate or Janet Mills or Aaron Frey or another Democrat in this race, they're going to be looking at this map from 2020 where Collins got 51% of the vote and say, okay, where can we improve? Or they're going to be looking at the 2024 map against Donald Trump and hoping that they can really more replicate this map. I think if Susan Collins does end up losing this race, I don't think it's going to be a massive blowout like we saw. I think the best example we could see is something kind of similar to what happened with Sherrod Brown in 2024, where the Republican Bernie Moreno defeated Sherrod Brown by 3.6%. And Brown, even though he lost this race, he lost by a pretty competitive margin. I think this is something we could potentially see in Maine. Maine also has an interesting election process where they utilize ranked choice voting if no candidate breaks 50% of the vote. So I was going to say Pennsylvania could be an example, but in this one, McCormick only got 48.8%. In Maine, the winning candidate must break 50% of the vote after ranked choice voting. So I don't think we're going to see an exact replicate of it being a super tight race under 1 point in the state of Maine in 2026. But if Susan Collins were to lose, I think we would have to see ranked choice voting likely be utilized, and it would probably be like a 50 to 48, 51-49, something like that situation. But it's very interesting to watch for in the state of Maine. Maine obviously plays a very important role in the 2026 Senate map, where I currently have it listed as slightly favored for the Republicans in the lean category, in between a 1 and 5% margin of victory as of now for Susan Collins. Maine also plays an important role in the Senate control, as right now Republicans are favored in 52 Senate seats, Democrats are favored in 45, and I have 3 currently listed as toss-up on my updated 2026 Senate map. So which party wins Maine, whether it's Susan Collins, the Republican, or maybe Graham Platner, the Democrat, or maybe Janet Mills, the Democrat, Maine's going to play a very important role in determining which party controls the Senate. And if the Democrats are unable to take the Senate in 2026, by winning the state of Maine, it would significantly cut into the Republicans' margins of holding the Senate and giving the Democrats a real chance at flipping it, if not in 2026, maybe in 2028. So Maine plays a very important role. If Maine were to go down, then the Democrats, if they were able to win Michigan and North Carolina, flipping that one blue, and Georgia, this would get the Senate 51 for the Republicans, 49 to the Democrats, where even if the Democrats lost Ohio and Iowa, Nebraska, and Texas, this would still give the Democrats a really strong chance of flipping the Senate in 2028. So Maine plays a very important role in the 2026 Senate map, and this is a race I am watching very closely heading into next year. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, any questions or comments you have. I can't wait to check all those out. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.